It began with a headache and a sore throat, but nothing out of the ordinary. On the morning of September 29, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up in her family's home in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, not feeling her best. Her parents, wanting to give her some quick relief before school, offered her an extra-strength Tylenol, just one capsule, the kind millions of Americans trusted every day. Hours later, Mary was, dead. Doctors were stunned. Her condition had rapidly deteriorated, but the cause remained a mystery. Then, as the day progressed, the picture grew more horrifying. Just a few miles away in the suburb of Arlington Heights, 27-year-old Adam Janis suddenly collapsed and died after taking Tylenol for what he thought was minor chest pain. His family rushed to his side, devastated by the sudden loss. While gathered in mourning at the Janis household, Adam's brother Stanley and Stanley's wife Teresa each took a capsule of the same Tylenol bottle to ease their own pain. They both died within hours. 3 deaths in one household, all seemingly random, and yet, when investigators looked closer, a chilling connection began to take shape. Over the next 2 days, more deaths followed, each one just as sudden, each one just as unexplained. But one thing became impossible to ignore. Every single victim had recently taken Tylenol. Something inside those little red and blue capsules was killing people. As toxicology reports came back, the answer was both immediate and terrifying. The victims had been poisoned with potassium cyanide, a fast-acting and deadly compound that prevents the body from absorbing oxygen. Death comes swiftly, often within minutes. The amount found in the Tylenol capsules was staggering. Some pills contained enough cyanide to kill 10 people, and authorities quickly realized that wasn't a case of contamination. This was intentional. Someone had tampered with bottles of Tylenol, replacing the powder inside the capsules with pure poison. The implications were almost too frightening to process. Tylenol was one of the most widely used medications in the country, stocked in nearly every American home. If a killer could access a random bottle on a shelf, lace it with poison, and return it undetected, then anyone, anywhere, could be a victim. Panic spread across Chicago and then across the nation. Local news stations began issuing urgent warnings. Pharmacies and supermarkets pulled Tylenol off the shelves by the thousands. People dumped their bottles in the trash, terrified that a trusted pain reliever had become a silent killer. Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, was thrown into crisis mode. The company initiated a massive recall, more than 31 million bottles, and halted production immediately. Public safety was the top priority, but the damage was already done. Fear had taken hold. Something so simple, so routine, had become deadly, and no one had any idea who was behind it or how many lives were at risk. As the body count rose and public fear intensified, the FBI, local police, and federal health agencies launched one of the largest manhunts in American criminal history. Dozens of investigators worked around the clock, scouring store records, interviewing pharmacy employees, and analyzing returned Tylenol bottles for clues. For days, there were no solid leads. There were no fingerprints and no eyewitnesses, and the killer had left behind nothing but chaos. Then a letter arrived. It was sent to Johnson & Johnson and postmarked from Chicago. The author claimed responsibility for the poisonings and demanded a ransom, $1 million in exchange for stopping the murders. The letter was signed with a fake name, but law enforcement traced it to a man named James William Lewis, a former tax consultant with a history of fraud and bizarre behavior. At first glance, Lewis seemed like the perfect suspect. He had the technical knowledge to handle cyanide and a criminal record that included violent threats. But despite the menacing letter, investigators couldn't place him in Chicago at the time. He was living in New York City. There were no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, and no direct connection to the contaminated bottles. Lewis was arrested and charged, not with murder, but with extortion. He was convicted and sentenced to 13 years in prison, but the core mystery remained unsolved. If not him, then who? The theory that emerged was simple but terrifying. The killer had likely bought Tylenol bottles at various stores, opened them at home, added the cyanide, and then returned the tainted bottles to the shelves. It required no hacking, no insider access, and no manufacturing tampering. Just cold calculation and the ability to blend in. It was the kind of attack that weaponized the ordinary, and that made it nearly impossible to trace. In stories like this, it's easy to get caught up in the mystery. The suspect profiles, the investigation twists, the media spectacle. But at its heart, this was a story about real people whose lives were stolen without warning. These weren't characters in a crime drama. They were mothers, fathers, daughters, and newlyweds. All of them unsuspecting, all of them innocent. Mary Kellerman was only 12. Her parents described her as bright, curious, and full of life. Her death was the first, and it sent shockwaves through her school and her community. Adam Janis, just 27, was a postal worker and a beloved son. He died trying to ease a small pain, not knowing the medicine in his cabinet had become a lethal trap. His brother Stanley and sister-in-law Teresa died the same day, poisoned by the same bottle. 3 family members gone in less than 24 hours. Mary Rayner was 27 and had just given birth to her 4th child. She took Tylenol to ease postpartum pain and never woke up. Mary McFarland, a 31-year-old single mother, collapsed in the break room at her job in Elmhurst after taking a capsule. Paula Prince, a 35-year-old flight attendant, was caught on security footage purchasing Tylenol from a Walgreens in downtown Chicago. She was found dead in her apartment the next day, the open bottle sitting nearby. 7 lives ended without warning and without reason. There was no logic to the killer's selection, no pattern to their victims. That randomness made it all the more terrifying. These were not people who walked into danger. The danger came to them. In the wake of the murders, Johnson & Johnson faced what should have been a corporate death sentence. But instead of denying responsibility or deflecting blame, they took unprecedented steps to rebuild trust. Their response would later be studied in business schools around the world. They immediately pulled every Tylenol product off the shelves, issued public service announcements urging people not to use the capsules, and cooperated fully with the investigators. It cost the company over $100 million, and it likely saved their brand. First of all, there is no reason at all that this needs to be studied in business schools. It should just be, hey, look, Johnson & Johnson did the responsible thing. something happened, they took it all off the shelf. They didn't worry about, they're worried about their customers. They're not worried about, oh no, did we lose money because we're not selling Tylenol for a little bit? Dude, like, I don't know why they would even study just being human and compassionate about what's going on in like the situation and all that stuff. I think that's the underlying thing here is Johnson & Johnson was like, holy crap, our customers are dropping. Let's make that not a thing, right? I don't feel like that needs to be something that needs to be taught. Just weeks after the crisis began, Johnson & Johnson returned Tylenol to the market, but this time with a groundbreaking change. The new bottles featured triple seal packaging, a glued box, a foil seal under the cap, and a plastic neckband. These tamper-evident measures weren't just symbolic. They became the new standard across the entire pharmaceutical industry. The Food and Drug Administration quickly followed suit, introducing regulations that required all over-the-counter medications to adopt tamper-proof packaging. Before 1982, it was common to see medicine sold in simple, resealable containers. After 1982, the era of shrink wrap, breakable seals, and protective linings began. The Tylenol case didn't just change the company, it changed the consumer world. The shift toward packaging safety extended to everything from food to cosmetics. And while no amount of innovation could erase the tragedy, it meant that millions of future products were safer. It was a legacy born of horror, but one that left behind real protections. Despite decades of investigation, the question that haunted the case remained unanswered. Who did it? The FBI poured thousands of hours into this case, but every trail eventually went cold. James Lewis remained the primary suspect for years. He had the technical background, the motive, and a disturbing tendency to insert himself into high-profile events. But there was no hard evidence placing him at the scene. In 2009, his home was searched again. Investigators seized computers, notebooks, even DNA samples, hoping that a new technology might finally yield a breakthrough. But once again, no charges were filed. Other suspects came and went. Some pointed to disgruntled employees, though Johnson & Johnson's internal audits found no foul play. Others floated theories about domestic terrorism, or even the possibility of a test run by a serial poisoner. Yet each theory hit the same wall. No proof, no confession, which leads to no closure. I look at this as 100% domestic terrorism. Whether the person meant to, kill a child or not, I mean, like, their only goal was for people to die. That was their only goal. So immediately it's domestic terrorism. It's not targeted. It's not a crime of passion or anything like that. It's not like that whole situation. And then even then, sabotage from competitors. I mean, it's not entirely off the table. Johnson & Johnson's huge. Maybe one of their competitors was like, we got to do this. And Johnson & Johnson might crumble, which they didn't. And so still we have Johnson & Johnson around. So who knows? In July 2023, James Lewis died at the age of 76. He had long denied any involvement in the murders. With his death, the last living link to the investigation may have vanished. Whether he was the killer or merely an opportunist, he took his secrets to the grave. To this day, the Tylenol murders remain officially unsolved. The poisonings didn't just change packaging, they changed psychology. In the months and years that followed, the American public grew acutely aware of the vulnerabilities in their everyday lives. If medicine could be tampered with, what else could be? Rumors of poisoned Halloween candy surged. Even though most were unfounded, supermarkets increased surveillance. Shoppers began inspecting every bottle, every box, every seal. What had once been casual became cautious. The Tylenol case also influenced criminal law in 1983. The U.S. Congress passed the Tylenol bill, making it a federal offense to tamper with consumer products. The law increased penalties for such crimes and gave federal agencies more authority to investigate them. It was a clear sign that the government understood what the public already feared. The next attack might not be as contained. Culturally, the case embedded itself in American memory. It was referenced in true crime shows, novels, and even urban legends. It became the benchmark for product safety and the nightmare scenario for public health officials. And every time another product scare hits the news, whether real or imagined, the phrase, like the Tylenol murders, resurfaced. This wasn't just a crime. It was a turning point. It's been over 4 decades since the Tylenol murders shocked the nation. The victims have long been buried. The case files have grown dusty, and yet the question still lingers in the air. Who did it? Who took one of the most trusted products in America and turned it into a weapon? Who smiled as families grieved, as investigators scrambled, as the country panicked? We may never know. The killer could have been a chemist, a loner, a terrorist, or just someone testing the boundaries of evil. They may have lived quietly for years after, never striking again. Or they may have felt emboldened, their crimes hidden behind the veil of anonymity. What's most chilling is how easy it was. No blood, no weapons, and just a return trip to the store shelf. And that's why this story still haunts us. It wasn't just about a product, it was about trust. Trust in medicine, in safety, in the systems meant to protect us. The Tylenol killer didn't just poison people, they poisoned peace of mind. And to this day, they got away with it. So what does this tell us, right? I mean, everything is sensitive to tampering. And we've even in today's society with stuff like fent being something possibly put into a water supply and wiping out a whole city or country. It's a big thing to be worried about when our food and our medications that we trust and that we take on a regular basis, like in my case, Excedrin migraine, right? It's a big issue when something you trust all of a sudden becomes something that terrifying, that you just all of a sudden, you're like, I don't even know. You just start throwing your stuff away. Let's not take this to light, so let's remember those names of the people who did lose their lives to that. And with that being said, this is Cracked Relic, and this was my coverage on the Tylenol murders. Sources will be down in the description and coming up in the credits after this. Thank you for watching.